The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Thursdays here. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency for all your equipment financing needs. Go Currency. Elijah Herbel back in the captain's chair today as I'm joined here in studio by Connor Clark, filling in today for Chris Schmidt, who will be back with us depending on his son's baseball schedule, either for our Saturday morning edition of Hail Varsity, 7:30 to 9, or for our Monday edition. It's going to be Connor and myself taking you through the show today, and a surprise coming your way tomorrow for my co-host. We'll let you know about that just a little bit later. A rainy day here in the capital city and really through much of eastern Nebraska, but it's all sunshine for me here, Connor, as those of us on stream can see. I am proudly rocking my Nuggets jersey. Nuggets, first time ever in the NBA Finals. That's going down tonight. I'm a happy camper. I have been watching probably every single Nikola Jokic highlight video known to man over the past couple days, and I'm raring to go.
I don't blame you, and I'm excited for this Finals, and I know we'll get into it later in the episode today, but it's just as a basketball fan, it's really interesting to see what kind of matchups you can get with the Nuggets and the Heat, and, Jimmy Butler, Jamal Murray, Jokic is probably going to feast inside against Miami, so how will they stop that? But, hey, you know what? I'm happy for you because this is something that obviously the Nuggets have never been able to do before. I know countless numbers of Nuggets fans since coming to school here, so there's a lot of happy, local Denver people that are honestly, if you ask me, getting quite spoiled because of the Avs last year and now the Nuggets this year. But
let's not talk about the Broncos. Let's not talk about their history. Maybe we deserve it after the pain the Broncos have put us through the past couple years. But
I'm not saying you're not deserving of it.
Yeah, well, we'll get there in just a second. A comment comes in from Crew just before the stream starts. If Elijah has a Denver Nuggets jersey on when this stream goes live, I'm going to lose it. No update from Crew just yet. Maybe he has
He's probably too busy losing it.
I am proudly rocking my Nuggets jersey. I am fearful that I'm going to get a text here and say I'm violating some dress code, but that's why I got into radio. I'm pretty sure there's no dress code. Well, as long as I'm wearing at least something.
You did think you were getting dress coded earlier.
I did. I was worried.
Which was funny. But, hey, you know what? It's respectable. You got the Jokic rainbow jersey on. For those who are just listening to us, and I would be doing the same thing if I was in your shoes. So I don't know if I would have gone the sleeveless look because I'm not as confident, probably, but I still would have gone the jersey for sure.
Yeah, it was like with the rain in the forecast today, a little bit humid. So I like the hoodie underneath the jersey look personally, but it was a little too warm for that. And the T-shirt under it, I think, unless you have the right T-shirt that kind of matches the jersey right, it's going to look a little bit goofy. So we're going sleeveless today, sun's out, guns out, even though the sun's not out. Regardless, I got plenty to get into today. As coming up a little bit later this hour, we'll have Brandon Vogel join the show. Brandon, his usual Thursday time slot, 4:25 p.m. We're going to talk brunch in Boulder with Brandon, as well as some rumors, maybe Colorado going to the Big 12. We'll get into that with Brandon Vogel a little bit later in the show. Leading off hour 2, we'll have a longtime coach, Colorado and Northwestern. Hear him every Thursday here on Hail Varsity Radio. Gary Barnett going to check in, and this is actually one that Schmitty was kind enough to leave us before he headed off to Kansas City for the weekend. He left us a sit down with Gary Barnett, so we're going to hear Schmitty's voice, even though he's not in here in studio today. Schmitty leaving us an interview with Gary Barnett, and then coming up later in the show, we're going to get your full betting preview of the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals. I got the Panthers and the Golden Knights going at it in the Stanley Cup Finals as well. Yeah, Danny, going to let you know the best way to make money. I hope it's betting on the Nuggets. We'll see Danny Burke joining us here a little bit later at 5:40. But the big news of the day, at least so far, this morning, has been news that was late breaking into us after the show last night. Keisei Tominaga with a message for Husker Nation.
I'm back.
I love how short and sweet and to the point that was. Like this minute-long video that he released up on his Twitter and his Instagram. Him knocking down a whole bunch of threes, whatnot, and then he just steps up to the camera at the end and says, I'm back. So short, sweet, simple message from Keisei Tominaga. He's going to be a Husker next year. This is something we talked about a little bit on the show, and a little bit Will and I hit it on Tuesday as well. the probability of Keisei returning. Confirmation coming last night just before that midnight deadline. Keisei returning for another year of eligibility.
Yeah, that was big time. And, of course, it happened in the most Keisei fashion. Just 3 words, very straight to the point. We talked about it right before we got on. We kind of feel bad for him because he's got to do all these video hits in a second language. So, I mean, it's a little more difficult for Keisei to kind of have that effect, I guess. But, I mean, that is obviously a huge returnee for Nebraska, and that was, the storyline going into the offseason because you already knew who you were going to lose if you're Fred Hoiberg. And, well, Keisei's going to go test the draft waters, try and get some workouts. He got one with the Pacers. I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't surprised when I saw that. I mean, I think I was a little surprised, and I think a lot of people were as well. But I mean, good on him. I mean, he deserved the workout. I'm not saying he didn't, but he had the workout earlier this week. The Pacers did a nice little video feature on him about his workout and how Fred Hoiberg has put him in the position to be the basketball player that he is right now, and the fact that he's coming back to Lincoln and everybody knows what he did, especially in the second half of the Big Ten schedule last year. I mean, it's a huge addition, and this opens the door to so many possibilities now for this Nebraska basketball team.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that late season surge, this from our friends over at Herd Sports. From February 1st on, Keisei averaging 20.3 points per game on 55.7% shooting and 43% from 3. Obviously, the 3-point shooting, a significant tick up at the second half of last season. That's what he's going to bring to this roster next year. And Connor, where I'm going to go with you right now is expectations for this Husker basketball team. We're going to get into some expectations for Husker football as well during this show, but let's start off with Husker basketball. There's some returning talent. I mean, Keisei is the one you really look at. The transfers coming in, I think you're really interested in what Rink Mast is going to bring, trying to replace Derek Walker. Derek Walker was more Draymond Green-esque in his game as time goes on. And whenever I look at that, I watch Draymond Green. I watch how Derek Walker played the game last year, and I kind of see some similarities there. I think that was the film study. As for Rink Mast, is he more of a Nikola Jokic comparison? That's timely in the NBA Finals, and it's hard to compare anyone to Jokic because he's one of one, but that's my thought there. You have Aaron Eulis coming in, assuming he's going to lead the point. There's some talent. There should be some expectations surrounding this Husker basketball team this year. And Connor, I want to get your take on just how high the expectation should be now that Keisei has come back, or is there still more talent that needs to be added in your opinion?
I mean, if you ask me, and this might be a little bit too aggressive for some people, but I'm thinking 18-19 wins. And I know we talk about drinking the Kool-Aid for football all the time, and I've honestly been on the opposite side of the spectrum for that, just straying away from that. But you have to be really pleased with what Fred Hoiberg has done over this offseason. You had Bryce Williams. You said Rink Mast earlier. Aaron Eulis as well from Iowa. You also get Josiah Alec, who is from Lincoln and has family ties. His sister's on the volleyball team, as we talked about when we got that commitment during a show that you and I were doing, actually, a couple weeks ago. And now you get Keisei back. And, oh, by the way, you still have Juwan Gary there, too. And a couple of other pieces that you discovered. C.J. Wilcher, who played well down the stretch last year. That'll be a big question mark. Can he carry that over into 2023-24? What is the role for Sam Hoiberg in the next year as well? Because you discovered kind of a hidden gem off the bench there, and obviously questions about his defense and can that improve? I mean, he's only so big. He's athletic as all get out, but he's only 6 feet tall, and he's guarding some of the better guards in the country. So I think this lineup can be very interesting. It could have a lot of different possibilities. You could go 6-7 across the board in that starting lineup. You could go more traditional look. You could go small ball if you really wanted to. So in a Big Ten and Keisei was just one of very many announcements last night that said that they were coming back to play Big Ten basketball, especially in a Big Ten conference that's not going to see too much turnover. It's going to be really interesting to see how Fred Hoiberg concocts this group into a lineup each and every single night, especially when you get into January, February, and when you start flirting with a postseason, because, again, I think if the Nebrasketball team from last year, what they went through, and the fact that you were still putting Nebraska and postseason, whether that's NIT or whatever, in the same sentence towards the tail end of February and into early March, I think, as a team, you have to have the expectation that you're going to take that step forward. And as a fan, you also have to have that same thing. And expect more out of the group, and knowing that I think the roster maybe got better from top to bottom. So you really got to make that next step here in this winter.
And I think with the return of Keisei, it's something I laid out with Will on Tuesday. I'm not sure he 100% agreed with me, but whenever I look at this roster top to bottom, I think you got 8 or 9 guys that have a legitimate argument to get significant minutes next year. And I don't think you can give significant minutes to 8 or 9 guys, but I think you have probably 8 guys on this roster, maybe 9 if you include Josiah Allick, depending on how he makes the transition to Big Ten basketball, that I think legitimately could be significant minute guys for you next year. And that not only makes it probably Fred Hoiberg's deepest roster at Nebraska, I think it makes it his most talented with what you saw from Keisei last year. The strides you saw from Jamarcus Lawrence towards the end of last season. Even a guy like Sam Hoiberg who came in and could be a defensive stopper in big moments. I don't think we're going to see as much of him in this next season, but when you consider that's going to be a guy coming off your bench, Ramel Lloyd's a guy that really impressed on scout team last year. I think he's a guy that's going to be trying to fight for some minutes this season. Then you add the transfers in. Rink Mast, a guy that I think you're going to assume is going to be your starting center next year. Josiah Allick, maybe a guy that is going to either line up on the 4 if you need to go a little bit bigger, or he's going to be your backup small ball 5 if you want to have a smaller backup lineup. You got Aaron Eulis, who could be a starting point guard, could be your point guard coming out for the 2s off the bench. I think your options that you have right now are really high, and I think you have a lot of guys that have played a good amount of basketball, that have some experience in the Big Ten, or have some traits that should be able to translate well to the Big Ten. And I think expectations, as you laid out, maybe not NCAA tournament. It's hard to put expectations like that on Nebraska based on where they've been the last season, but I think this should be Fred Hoiberg's best year at Nebraska, and if it's anything short of that, I think Nebraska's going to be looking for a new head coach next season, just because of what he has, what the end of last season looked like, and just how much talent there is from 1 through 8 on this roster.
Well, it's certainly on paper, it is the best roster and the best chance that Fred Hoiberg has at Nebraska to do something special, and in PBA especially too. It'll be the 10th year of that arena, and I mean, Nebrasketball really hasn't had too much to root for in that building. And now, and again, too, you see the buzz. Like, when this team is good and playing well and winning, you saw the buzz last year in February. I mean, that place was rocking every single home game. Now, you go to the paper argument, and yes, very good team, top to bottom, should be flirting with postseason, if not in postseason next year, whether that's NIT. I'm not going to go NCAA because that's just too far for me right now, but who's going to replace the leadership? This is the big question. Who's going to replace the leadership that Sam Griesel and Derek Walker brought you from a season ago? Because those two, I mean, they led the ship. Obviously, you had the great shooting from Keisei and everything, and he played very well. Hoiberg kind of led by example with his play off the bench, and he was flying around all over the court every single time he got in. But who's going to be that leader? Who's going to step up, take over that role? Because obviously you bring in Griesel last year, a Lincoln kid, and he cares so much about the program, and you saw that in his play. Maybe Alec kind of shares that same identity with him.
He's played a lot of basketball.
And then Rink Mast, too, he's a veteran guy, plays a similar position as Derek Walker, plays a similar style as Derek Walker as well, too. So who's going to replace that leadership? We will find out. And again, I mean, as I'm thinking through the roster, too, I mean, guys still keep popping up in my head. You have Juwan Gary, you have C.J. Wilcher, you have, oh, by the way, Jamarcus Lawrence, who played great down the stretch last year, too. I mean, this is a good problem to have. So you have a lot of options that you can go to. And I wouldn't say you had 9 guys that can play significant minutes, but I think you can have 7 that can play around at least 20 a game if you really needed them to.
It's a nice problem to have, as you laid out, the fact that there's going to be guys that have played a good amount of basketball that are going to be guys that, you know what, they're going to be guys that are coming off your bench, the back end of the bench. You know, they're going to be lucky to get 5 to 10 minutes in a game, but depending on situation. That's a nice problem to have. I like your take on the leadership there. I think there's some options with Gary. I look at Alec, he's played a lot of basketball. Aaron Eulis has been around the Big Ten. I think there's some options. We'll see how this team is able to come together. Before we got to hear this segment, a quick thought from Kirk Herbstreit on Matt Rule and the task ahead of Matt Rule at Nebraska. We're going to get into this a little bit with Brandon Vogel. He talks about just what that turnaround as a whole can look like. But Kirk Herbstreit sat down with On Threes, J.D. Piquel. We encourage you to check out that full podcast if you get the chance. A really good sit down, but here's Kirk Herbstreit's thoughts on Matt Rule taking over at Nebraska, what he thinks of Matt Rule, and what he thinks this rebuild can look like.
You're talking to a massive Matt Rule fan. You know, I'm a big believer in him and the culture that he creates. I'll be more surprised if he can't do it than if he can. You know, And again, I thought when Scott Frost went back home, I thought it would click too. I mean, they have resources, they have history and tradition. Now, people say in 2023 they're in Lincoln, Nebraska. Who wants to go and play there? But if you have the right coach who can create that energy, then I think you can bring recruits in. I think he'll recruit Texas. I think he'll get into Southern California. I think he'll even try to get into Florida and New Jersey, going back to the Tom Osborne glory days. I'm not saying this year, here they come, but you're going to start to see some signs of Nebraska starting to kind of be like, And I think he's going to recruit. Again, he did it at Baylor. When he went to Baylor, I don't think anybody thought Baylor would be able to win any games.
No.
And he got them competing for Big 12 championships. So the guy will do it, knows how to coach, knows how to recruit. He's coming. I just don't know when it's going to be.
No, we'll get into that discussion. When is that going to be with Brandon Vogel here in just a second as Vogel joins us after the break, his usual 4:25 Thursday segment. We're excited to talk with Brandon. But one of the things like I think about when I talk about how long is this going to take is something we talked about yesterday on the show, me and Schmitty. What's the litmus test going to be for this Husker football team to see how good they can be in year one? I think that's going to be the question is how long do you have to wait into the season? It's going to be until October before you finally get a good litmus test. Are you going to be able to get a good idea of what this team can be against Minnesota or against Colorado? Those are questions that are on my mind today, and we're going to get there with Brandon Vogel as well as his thoughts. Maybe Colorado going to the Big 12. That's been a story today. And Vogue's thoughts on brunch in Boulder, the 10 a.m. local time kick between Nebraska and Colorado, all that coming your way. After the break, it's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Rolling through a Thursday, June 1st edition of Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark taking you through this Thursday edition. Schmitty has today and tomorrow off. We hope to see him back in here on Saturday morning. If not, kind of depends on his son's baseball schedule. He'll be back in for your Monday edition of Hail Varsity Radio. We're excited to welcome in the managing editor of Hail Varsity Magazine. It's Brandon Vogel joining us here on Hail Varsity Radio, his usual Thursday 4:25 segment. And Brandon, we had some discussions back in segment one, Connor and myself, that is. And as you being the managing editor of Hail Varsity, I think you have the final say. Do I get dress coded for wearing the Nikola Jokic jersey on game one of the finals? Is that permissible to do?
Not today. You have the right to bear arms, Elijah, and you have. So I appreciated it when I hopped on and was checking out the first segment on Twitter. So it's a nice move. Growing up in Western Nebraska, I went to quite a few Nuggets games. Didn't become a Nuggets fan, but definitely saw some of the Nuggets greats like Alex English and Fat Lever, Dikembe Mutombo, and as a rookie in the Jordan game. I was at that Chicago Bulls Nuggets game when Jordan closed his eyes and shot the free throw. So I've got some fond memories of the Nuggets.
Yeah, and for me, being a younger Nuggets fan, it's always memories of David Thompson, Alex English. Like you just hear the legends of these guys. The rumor with David Thompson was he could jump high enough that if you put a penny on the top of the backboard, he could go up and grab the penny off the top of the backboard. And Michael Jordan said he did do some modeling of his game after David Thompson. And it's crazy to think with all those legends of the sport that have been on the Nuggets through the years, they've never made an NBA Finals. Today is the first time in history. It's a momentous day for me, and I'm very much looking forward to what the Nuggets can do tonight. Brandon, let's get to some football thoughts here as we need to get your reaction to a brunch in Boulder. That was the title of our show yesterday for those that check it out in podcast form. That's the theme, 10 a.m. local time kickoff between Nebraska and Colorado. I think whenever people saw who was going to be the night game on NBC, that it was Maryland and Charlotte, like, oh yeah, Nebraska is going to be trending in that direction towards big noon kickoff. Your reaction to what that means, not only for the fans that are going to be in Boulder, but just in college football as a whole, that a game like Nebraska and Colorado is going to lead off the slate of week 2, put it at the big noon kickoff spot on September 9th.
Yeah, no primetime, and primetime makes me a little sad for that reason alone. But this is probably the next biggest spot you can have on that second Saturday of the college football season. So should be a pretty fun atmosphere. I mean, I think for games like that, and this is a rare one, I don't think you see it so much with 11 a.m. and it's only an hour earlier, and these guys they'll be perfectly fine and adjusted. But you know, those things might favor the home team slightly. I think they probably favor the more prepared and buttoned up team, and who knows which one that's going to be at this point. It's a long ways off. So It is what it is. It'll be a little bit strange for those people who are out there, and I expect there to be a lot of Nebraska people out in Boulder to kick that thing off at 10 a.m. But I'm looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to that game all off season. I think it's going to be a ton of fun.
You mentioned the fact that Coach Prime first 2 weeks not going to be playing in prime time, but couldn't you make the argument that 11 a.m. noon Eastern time is the new prime time in college football, with the tendency within the past 2 or 3 seasons to put so many great games in that window? It makes some sense. You know what? You give fans a great game to watch after your morning college football leadoff show, whether it be College Game Day, Big Noon Kickoff, whatever it's going to be. You're going to put a great game in that window, and that's now your new money-making spot before people get busy and have other things to do with their Saturday.
Yeah, I think it can be. It's definitely, for the traditionalists, college football during the day probably has always seemed the biggest. And, I guess credit to Fox for kind of recognizing that and making a push to make that a thing. I mean, they used it to launch their own pregame show. I'll hop in depending on where they're at and which game it is on that one. I've been watching College Game Day for so long that it's just kind of habit for me. That's usually where I stick. But it's kind of become a thing. And I'd say most of the time, if I am watching game day, the next place I go, depending on what time the Nebraska game is to Big Noon Saturday. So they gave it a name, they got the games, and did a pretty good job of making it a thing.
Well, what's interesting, Connor, not to step on your toes here at all, but whenever you look back at the 10 most viewed college football games of last season, excluding the college football playoff, 3 of those top 10 occurred during the noon time slot. One of those was the Big 12 championship game, so you might have to toss that one to the side. But Michigan-Ohio State, 17.1 million viewers for that noon time slot. It's the trend that we're moving towards in college football, that the new prime time is 11 a.m. and the new garbage spot is 2:30.
A garbage spot for 2:30. That might be a little harsh, but it's kind of like it just kind of gets sandwiched in there, but I understand.
Well, I'm just saying it used to be 11 a.m. was the time where you'd flip on the game and you'd see Ohio State playing Middle Tennessee State, and you'd say that's no fun. And now you're actually getting the big helmet matchups in that 11 a.m. time slot.
That's true. But we want to go over, too, because we were talking about this, Brandon, and what you could look for or what you could, tell about this Nebraska team if, say, hypothetically they split the first two. I mean, would you be able to, I don't want to say draw conclusions because it's only 2 games, but at least kind of get an idea of what to expect on a week-to-week basis?
I think these 2 games and the fact that they're both on the road, both against Power 5 opponents, are probably about as telling a first 2 games as I can remember in a Nebraska season. How much can we tell from it? It depends on which one they win. If we're operating under a split, they beat Minnesota. That's a pretty good sign. Lose to Minnesota, I'm kind of like, Nebraska's not going to be favored in that game, I don't think, but I think the line will be pretty tight. Right now, it was, on the way early lines, which are low limits. So take from it what you can. Last I saw, I think Nebraska was about a 6-point favorite over Colorado. And, Dion, all of the talent they've brought in, all of the talent they've needed to bring in based on all that departed is all fine and good. But that Colorado team was in really rough shape a year ago. So 1-1, if it's a win over Colorado, I'm kind of like, okay, Nebraska, the type of season I think Nebraska can have is still very much on the table. 1-1 with a win over Minnesota, and then you drop one in Dion's first home game. That one, I would still, I guess 1-1 either way, I would feel pretty good about what's to come. And then you come home, you've got your 2 G5 games, which become really important. I feel like we're going to have a really good sense of where Nebraska's at after its first 4 games going into October.
And as Mitch Sherman laid out in a story that he wrote on The Athletic earlier this week, Nebraska 2-14 against Power 5 opponents in the first month of the season, dating back to 2018. So 1-1 against those 2 schools. While it doesn't seem to fit the Nebraska standards of old, it's to be a market improvement based on what we've seen over the past couple of seasons. And Brandon, before we get to what game you think is truly the litmus test for if Nebraska compete in the Big Ten West, what are you going to be looking for in those first 2 games? I guess give me a sign, a reason for optimism that Nebraska can go 1-1 or 2-0 in those games, and then give me a reason for pessimism that Nebraska could drop both of these.
Yeah, I mean, they both might involve. Well, I guess we can take a different angle at this. And Minnesota is a good litmus test for this because we know the way that they have played under PJ Fleck. It's really physical. It's really ball control. If Nebraska can go to Minnesota and do its version of that, which primarily means that the run game would have to be pretty successful, I think. If it can control the clock in that game, then I would get even a little bit, I think, more optimistic about what's possible. In year one, the signs for pessimism in either of them, and here's where Colorado comes in. If the offensive line doesn't look improved, which if that's the case, you're not going to run the ball that well against Minnesota. It would be really bad against Colorado because for all the talent that they've brought in, and they have, I think, upgraded that roster overall. I've got some concerns about where they're at on both lines. It's just kind of an open question in my mind, viewing it from afar, of how good they're going to be right away on the interior on both sides of the ball. So if Nebraska can't win that line matchup, then I'm starting to think maybe this is a sign of trouble. So how well they run the ball probably tells us quite a bit, and how in control they feel of those games. And it's tough against Minnesota. Minnesota is a team that sets out like we're going to control the flow of this game, and if we do that, we'll probably win.
Brent, I'm going to reset a question that we had yesterday on this show. It's tough to call Minnesota a litmus test for how Nebraska can actually compete in the Big Ten West this year based on the fact that it's the first game under a first-year head coach. So which game on Nebraska's schedule do you think is going to be the litmus test for can Nebraska compete, maybe not for a Big Ten West crown, but at least to be respectable in the Big Ten West?
Yeah, if that Minnesota game were in October, I would think that's a good pick for that. Just in terms of what I think Nebraska wants to do on both sides of the ball, what Minnesota has been doing, and Nebraska's recent record against the Gophers, it does get a little wonky because it's game one. But you've got at least what last year looked like a very similar to Minnesota type of team in Illinois coming in October. I think that's going to be a pretty good barometer of where Nebraska's at. Illinois obviously lost its defensive coordinator to the head coaching job at Purdue. They'll have a new quarterback, lost Chase Brown. So the Illini have a lot to replace, but I think they're built on a pretty solid foundation. And I was really impressed with what they did last year. So that's one of those toss-up games with two teams that, in terms of preseason win totals are sitting right around 6.5. I would guess Illinois is probably a slight favorite at home, and it's a Friday night home game, and Illinois, which you don't take for granted, as I think had 95% renewals on their season tickets from last year. So Bielema's making some really good progress there. So that one feels like a pretty good one right there towards the middle of the season, where it's like we're going to find out where Nebraska is in terms of the Big Ten specifically.
Last thought here, Brandon, something we're going to get into next segment. The rumors swirling today that Colorado may be looking to rejoin the Big 12. The TV rights deal for the Pac-12 ends a year from now. Your thoughts, does that move make sense to you, using the hype around Dion to parlay a move back to the Big 12?
Yeah, I think it would if I'm in Colorado's shoes. I mean, the Big 12 just seems more stable than the Pac-12 right now. And if that were a move like a Colorado or the Arizona schools, or maybe Utah comes along, were to jump to the Big 12, all of a sudden I think the Pac-12, like I would expect the Big 10 to really up its efforts for anybody it wanted in that conference if that were the case. So I just think there's more stability in the Big 12. Yeah, they're losing Texas and Oklahoma, and that hurts. But they added 4 pretty good teams to the conference roster. So there's just more stability there in my mind. It would make sense for that alone.
Brandon Vogel's with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. Find him, follow him on Twitter at Brandon L. Vogel. Brandon, appreciate you taking some time out of your afternoon today, and we'll talk to you Saturday morning, all right?
All right, guys, have a good one.
We'll get into Colorado potentially looking to leave the Pac-12 after the break on Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Rolling through a Thursday here. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency for all of your equipment financing needs. Go Currency, Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark with you here on this rainy June 1st in southeastern Nebraska, wherever you're listening from. We wish you sunshine and happy days. Whatever. I'm going to move on from that. I was going to try to find a nice transition from sunshine and happy days to conference realignment, but it's hard to do that. So we're just going to go straight into it, Connor. What we ended with Brandon Vogel with there was the rumors swirling within the past 24 to 48 hours. You can go back a little bit longer than that, but they seem to have really heated up within the past 2 days or so. Colorado could be looking to join the Big 12 Conference, dare I say rejoin the Big 12 Conference after a little over a decade away in the Pac-12. Hasn't gone how they've expected. One appearance in the Pac-12 championship game is all for Colorado, and during that time, a sub-500 record, 48-94, well below 500 during their time in the Pac-12 Conference. They have lost 76 of 103 conference games, and they have not been a significant reason or there has not been a significant reason to keep them around based on what they're doing to TV media rights. Now, could that change with the addition of Coach Prime? That's a possibility, but that's where this conversation comes from. An article from Max Olson released in The Athletic a little bit earlier today saying that sources have told him that within the past 3 months, conversations have heated up between the the Big 12 and the Colorado Buffaloes in terms of re-adding the Buffs back to the Big 12. They were not authorized, those sources, to speak publicly about the discussions, but they did say that no Pac-12 school has been more receptive to joining the Big 12 than Colorado. So Colorado, the interest is high. It's high in the Big 12, and with the media rights of the Pac-12 in question, they're set to expire July 1st of 2024. ESPN and ABC, the Disney family of networks, has already said they do not plan to refigure the contract, re-sign a contract with the Pac-12. So the Pac-12 looking for a new media rights partner. There was discussions earlier this winter that the CW may be looking to take over Pac-12 TV media rights deal. So that's the state of the Pac-12 right now. Colorado possibly looking for greener pastures, rejoining the Big 12. And it's a move that, Connor, it seems to make sense from all parties way too much for this to not be going down behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes sense, and it even makes sense geographically, too. I mean, because that's sort of how the conferences were aligned to begin with, right? And then you add in monetary reasons, you add in competition. I think Brandon brought up a really good point. Even though the Big 12 lost Texas and OU, they brought in 4 pretty solid athletic programs all around in Houston, BYU, I'm going to forget somebody, Cincinnati, and UCF.
UCF, there it is.
So you bring in 4 quality programs in, and they all have their ups and downs. I mean, because you look at Houston, good football team, really good basketball team. BYU's been solid at both. UCF has been solid at both, especially football in the last couple of years. And Cincinnati is obviously no more Luke Fickell, but a college football playoff team not too long ago as well. And they also have a pretty good basketball program too. So if Colorado wants to make the move, which honestly I think they should, it makes sense for football, and I'm just talking about like the 2 biggest sports here. It makes sense for football. It makes sense for basketball too. A team in Colorado too, who's at a pretty decent couple of year stretch now in the hardwood. It would make sense, and I think the media rights deals, as you said too. If I'm Colorado, I'm sorry, no offense to the CW, but I'm going to try and avoid that contract at all costs and try and get down to the Big 12, where it seems like, again, as Brandon said, more stability, which is also a big thing right now. And the fact that if you could go back to a Big 12 conference in which you were in before, I think that helps you get in a little bit more as well. So I think it'll be a good move, and I think you're exactly right. It almost works out too well for this not to happen.
Well, look at it from all sides. From the Pac-12, is Colorado going to be moving the needle in your TV media rights deal? It kind of remains to be seen what happens with Coach Prime, and you expect that those negotiations are going to be getting done this summer, and something that's come out of the Colorado program from some sources is that they're not going to make a move until they have more clarity on what the next TV media rights deal looks like. But I don't think Colorado moves the needle for the Pac-12 all that much. There's no exit fee for Colorado to exit the Pac-12. That's been what's discussed with the ACC, the high exit fees that those schools would have to pay to leave the ACC to go to, say, an SEC or a Big Ten. There's no exit fee for Colorado to leave the Big 12 because you can fulfill your TV media rights deal, and then in 2024, you're done. You can separate cleanly. There's going to be no problems. The Big 12 extremely receptive to it. It makes sense in terms of the fact that BYU is joining the Big 12, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, BYU joining the Big 12, so you're going to be able to have a more mountain presence. I mean, Denver right next to Boulder, they're the number 12 TV media market in the country. There's a lot of things that make sense from the Big 12's point of view, from Colorado's point of view, from the Pac-12's point of view. And from the Pac-12 point of view, if you lose Colorado, it almost seems pretty like for like to go at a school like SDSU, San Diego State. They have recent basketball success on the hardwood. They're going to be able to slot in there. The football team is all right. It's closer to the schools that you already have in the Pac-12, and you might have more interest from traditional Pac-12 fans in SDSU. San Diego State, obviously not South Dakota State. I think you have an easy replacement lined up for Colorado, and it's just one of those things that seems to make way too much sense, and there's way too much smoke for there to not be fire.
Well, and you mentioned the moving the needle TV-wise. I mean, yeah, Coach Prime will do that at least for this year.
At least a year, yeah.
But even then, you're competing against brands, especially on the football side of things now. Recently, Utah, who's been really good. You have Oregon still, who's one of the top brands in the country. Washington has been good at football for the past handful of years. So you have teams like that, and I know UCLA and USC won't be in the picture anymore coming in 2024, but you're not going to be impacting that side of things too much. And honestly, you probably wouldn't be doing that as much in the Big 12 either, but it just seems like a better situation with, the way that the Pac-12 is trending, because I think the approach from Colorado here too is, okay, if teams start leaving, you don't want to be one of those teams that's stuck when the Pac-12 is down to like 8 schools and they're caught with their pants down. They don't know what to do. So you want to get out now when you have the chance, and you said no exit fee as well. That's also a smart financial decision. I mean, and Deion has been very vocal about wanting to go to the Big 12 as well. I mean, he hasn't even coached a game at Colorado, and he already wants in on the Big 12 and out of the Pac-12. So I think it probably will happen at some point. Only time will tell.
I guess the concern for the Pac-12 does become, as you laid out, if Colorado leaves, what does Arizona do?
That's another big
Does Arizona
brand.
look to go to the Big 12? To Washington and Oregon look to make a Big 10 jump? That's the question is does the Pac-12 fall apart? But what we've seen through 15 years of conference realignment now is whenever there's fears of a conference falling apart, it tends to be more slippery slope than anything. The conference finds a way to keep things together. Yeah, your two biggest brands in UCLA and USC left the conference. There's discussions last summer. Does the Pac-12 fall apart? Thus far, we have seen no. The new TV media rights deal could change things, but I think the Pac-12 is too large to fail, even if it's going to be with different programs. Maybe you get an exodus. I don't see that failing. They fall out of Power 5 status. That's something that would be potential and remain to be seen, but that seems so dramatic to me that I just...
Especially with teams that have been in the Power 5 for so long. You can't just not make them Power 5 anymore.
Pivotal time for the Pac-12, though. Pivotal time for Colorado, looking to parlay some of this hype around Deion Sanders into a more stable future for themselves. I think the Big 12 is stability. The Pac-12 is chaos and confusion. So we'll see what happens there. We'll get into the SEC and their scheduling. Late breaking news into Hail Varsity on that. We'll get that after the break. It's Hail Varsity Radio.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Dropping up hour one here at Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark in for Chris Schmidt today, as we've had plenty to get into here in this first hour. Keisei Tominaga returning to Nebraska basketball for one more season. We talked with Brandon Vogel about brunch in Boulder as well as Colorado. Maybe looking to leave the pastures of the Pac-12 for greener pastures of the Big 12. All of that here in the first hour, and some breaking news coming in from Brett McMurphy as he reports that SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey has decided that the SEC will remain at 8 conference games per season in 2024 when Oklahoma and Texas join the league. Obviously, the Big 10 at 9 conference games at the moment right now, but the SEC holding pat. Why is that? Well, it's not going to change their bottom dollar. And what the SEC builds himself on is being, the conference that's going to be producing all of these high-level football programs, college football playoff type teams. If you want to play high-level football, you play in the SEC. Doesn't hurt to inflate your record by a game. Doesn't hurt to give yourself a non-conference game in November where you can rest the starters at halftime, get yourself a bye week of sorts in the middle of your conference slate. And it doesn't change how much money you're going to be raking in from ESPN/ABC. If you remember a couple years ago, the SEC signed that $3 billion deal from ESPN over 10 years. And what's the point of adding another game if you're not going to be going and renegotiating your TV rights at the same time for giving ESPN another conference game? You don't really see the point in it. The only thing that it does is it puts you more in line with what other conferences are doing, the Big Ten, but thus far it hasn't impacted your ability for your conference champion and even your conference runner-up to go make the college football playoff. So from an SEC point of view, I should say, what's the incentive for going to 9 conference games?
I don't know. Well, obviously from a fan perspective, it's just better. And I would have an issue with them not moving if the SEC was kind of like, and I hate to draw this comparison, but was kind of like the Big Ten when it comes to March Madness. Mm-hmm. And you're really good in the regular season, but you don't show up in the playoff. Well, the SEC shows up in the playoff, right? So the fact that they're having 8 conference games rather, would I like them as a fan of the game of football? Would I like 9 SEC conference games? Sure, but that's what they ultimately decided to do. We all know that the SEC is a very legitimate conference, especially in football and now basketball too. So I understand people having a problem with it, but it's something that's not going to, keep me up at night per se, because they're still the SEC and it's still the highest level of collegiate football.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
Right? If you're still making college football playoffs, if your teams are still doing well in the college football playoff, what's the point of adding a 9-conference game unless you're going to be getting more money out of your TV rights deal, which as it stands right now, you wouldn't be getting more money. So
it also leaves more room to venture outside of your conference too. Think about it, because you could have a marquee matchup between a high power in the SEC and a high power in the Big 12 or the ACC or the Big 10.
And from an SEC point of view, if you schedule that week 1 or week 2, say Alabama loses to Texas week 2, it's a lot more forgivable than a week 11 loss to a conference opponent.
Exactly.
You can go forgive a team that lost early in the season and say, well, you can throw that one out. The team hadn't hit their stride yet. They were still figuring things out. They lost the game by 3 points. We can throw that to the side. You can't throw a loss to Auburn to the side. You can't throw a loss to Tennessee to the side. That means a little bit more. So it comes down to the what they've been doing has been working. It's been producing college football playoff teams. What's the point of adding a 9th, I guess? I would like to see it. I'm with you, but from an SEC point of view, there's no reason to.
Right.
So that'll do it for Hour 1 of Hail Varsity Radio. When we return, longtime coach, Colorado Northwestern, Gary Barnett joins to talk brunch in Boulder.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back into it at Hail Varsity Radio. Let's talk some college football with Colorado and Northwestern Hall of Famer, Missouri Hall of Famer too, Coach Gary Barnett with us. Coach, how's the week? Thanks for the time.
Well, we've had a full week back in Boulder now, and it's been Grandkid City. We've had baseball tournaments, continuations, which is, by the way, 8th grade graduation, if you don't remember those days. We had a big band concert, and my grandson's a drummer. So, yeah, we're just fixing things. Nothing works when you get back. So I made 3 trips to Home Depot this week already, and we've got repairmen coming out. So, you just got to settle in when you make a move, migrate like this, and it's the way things happen.
Do you have a nail gun? And if so, have you ever put up a fake dartboard to use it like target practice, kind of Happy Gilmore?
I do not have a nail gun. I'm lucky to have a hammer, but no nail guns around here. I have a big blower. That's about as mechanical as I get.
Well, that works. Those are good. You mentioned the music part of your week, and I was getting a kick out of this, where you have amnesia that happens. Concert amnesia is what it's deemed. You've got Taylor Swift fans that black out during the show. And there's been some assistant coaches I had talked to over the years where Coach Pelini would go to a weird place during a game and not remember half of what he said or did. And what I mean by that is, like, he's so into it. Do you have those moments in big games, either as a player or as a coach, where do you remember everything, or do you have trouble remembering moments in a game and it may jar your memory after watching it a second time? Has that ever happened to you?
Well, the logical answer to this is I can't remember. But I really can't. I can't remember blanking out or going so deep into it that I couldn't do that. I don't think that's my nature, but no, I don't necessarily. I don't think I've gone that deep into the passionate moment. Mm-hmm. The passion of the moment, but I get it. I understand it, but no, I always felt like the one person who had to have total control was me. Mm-hmm. Everybody else has got things that they're really responsible for that they have to get totally into, and I'm sort of overseeing everything. So I felt like I could never afford to do that, so I never would let myself, and I don't ever remember maybe losing. Now, if you talk to my assistant coaches, they may have a different story than what I have. That seems to be happening a lot to me, that their stories are different than what I remember, and especially the players. Players remember things that you did, but you don't even remember it had any kind of an impact on them, or the kind of impact that they received. So it's that's always fun when you get together with former players or coaches. They start telling stories about you.
Those got to be making you smile. Gary Barnett with us.
They do.
Hail Varsity. Is there one that you can kind of share that was brought up that maybe you were reminded of when we're talking about concert or game amnesia? Well,
I remember my first year at Northwestern, and we're playing at Ohio State. And, I mean, we were a disaster on offense. And I remember going into the offensive meeting at halftime, and my coaches I keep saying I didn't say this, and they keep telling me I did. And I said to them, I could have stopped at 7-Eleven and found 4 guys who could call plays better than you guys.
Wow.
And that has rung with them for years. Every conversation starts that way. He says, hey, this is CJ from 7-Eleven. You remember me? So, yeah. Not one of my fonder moments, and of course I try to put that off. I try to not remember that.
That's funny. Did Mac ever lay into you guys, though, too? I mean, I'm sure maybe the 7-Eleven take was in the heat of the moment, but I'm sure you've also been on the receiving end.
Mac was, before the game, he would quiz us on things like, what are you going to do on 3rd and 1 and it's raining? What are you going to do if it's 3rd and 14 and the snow started, and the wind kicks up? Or what are you going to do if you're backed up on the 1-yard line and there's so much time? And so every morning before every game, we go through this question and answer session with him, and it drove us nuts because we'd spend the whole night before trying to think of the things he might ask us. During the game, he would talk more to the coordinators than to the assistants. But the coordinators, like Jerry DiNardo, was in the booth, and I was on the sideline. So Mac had to go through me because he took his headsets off in 1986. So from that point on, he had to find me and yank my headsets off and talk to Jerry the way he wanted to talk to him. But after the game, he every once in a while he was, but not very often. He was pretty good.
Gary Barnett's with us. I can imagine. Here, you talked to Jerry, right? Did you just hand him the headset instead of screaming at me?
They would used to warn me. We had a warning when Mac was getting close to me. They'd say, Ralphie. So that meant for me to move away because he's coming after. He wasn't coming after me, but he was coming after Jerry.
Oh man!
But he wanted to use my headset.
That's so funny. Ralph, that's so good.
Yeah.
Coach, let's spend a minute here on kickoff times and 10 a.m. Nebraska-Colorado. You look at Big Noon kickoff and how wildly popular that is, back-to-back weeks with Colorado there, and lukewarm on a 10 a.m. kick, or we're kind of back to you're taking the money argument, right? So you got to do what the TV folks want.
Well, you don't have any choice. I don't think any of us want to play a 10 a.m. start out here, but it's the way of the world, and I thought all along that maybe we might get game day on the first week against TCU, but I think a lot of people are. There's a certain amount of people that are really excited about Coach Sanders, and then I think the TV and press people are just sort of mediocre on it. They're taking a wait and see, and they're not going to give him too much too early. So a Big Noon kickoff, I think it's probably a bigger thing where you are in the Midwest than it is in Colorado and the West Coast. So 10 o'clock would just, you limit the amount of revenue that was going to be accumulated in the city of Boulder. I think sooner or later it'll get spent, I guess. But I think it'd be a little more exciting to do it 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Even a night game, and I'm not usually a night game guy, but I think that one at night would be spectacular. But it is what it is.
Well, I would even lobby for a Pac-12 after dark. I mean, I don't know how many times I watched Washington State at 9 p.m. Give me a 9 p.m. kick in Boulder. And do it that way. Gary Barnett's with us. Let's talk dream matchups. Do you think we're going to be able to see more inter-conference, non-conference games, or do you think those slowly slip away just because you have more conference expansion and you're going to have a lot of 9-game schedules? What's the point of maybe hurting yourself for a playoff spot if you risk a game, say like an SC Bama back not long ago when they kicked off to open the year?
Well, I think that when you go to the 12 teams, you've got a lot more room to lose a game.
Okay.
And, in fact, of the 12 teams that go in, my guess is 10 of them will have lost at least one game. So it's not the rule's going to be different. The setup's different. So the way you can approach it, you can be more willing to play those games. Will people do it? I'm not sure. But sooner or later, when all this shakes out, you're not going to have any choice but play good teams if you're in the right level. If you're not, then that's a different deal. But if you're in the upper echelon of college football, you're not going to have choices. The NFL doesn't have choices. And as we move more and more towards an NFL model, that's what the schedule is going to look like for the colleges, is more like an NFL model. So I don't know. I mean, it depends on where you are in your program. If you need a dinner, if you need to go play and show up and have a chance to beat a big boy, you got to play the big boys. And if you're just trying to accumulate non-Power 5 wins, okay. But you're never validated until you beat a big boy. And, most coaches want that. Most coaches want to go play the upper echelon, the next group up, and test and show that you're ready to go play them. So, but like I said, as you move more towards the NFL setup, then you're going to have more NFL-type schedules.
What did you want to do? And I know there were different points in the program. We've talked in the past about the fact Colorado scheduled super aggressively. That was to test your team, but it was also to get butts in the seats. And you guys had really, really good schedules. I mean, you'd have UCLA, you'd have USC, you'd have Texas. Right. I mean, that's on top of playing Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Okie State. So as you took over, what did you want to do? What could you live with? Because you had a lot of rivalry games, too, that were already built in.
Yeah, we already had, at the Big 12 at that time, we were a heck of a conference. Mm-hmm. And, you're playing the big boys each week. And so, I didn't really care at that point in time. I didn't look forward to playing San Jose State because the consequences of not being your best in a game like that, it's a lot worse to lose those games than it is good to win them. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I didn't look forward to that like I would preparing for a UCLA or USC, which we played, year in and year out when we were in the Big 12. And everybody in your program gets jacked up to play those teams, and you feel it. And every practice is bigger and better. And, your concern is more about not respecting your opponent. And the toughest job you had every week when you played teams like San Jose and they were good enough to beat you. And if you didn't convince your team of that, and if they didn't play with the respect that they had, that same respect they had when they played Nebraska, then guess what, man? It's not going to go the way you hope it goes. So those were the challenges, more mental against those teams, the non-Power 5 teams, than it was the Power 5 teams.
Coach, we'll get you out of here on this. Gary Barnett with us. And last week, ESPN.com came up with their top 75 quarterbacks of the 2000s. And Eric Crouch came in at number 45. Thoughts on Crouch? You faced him all 4 years. And what he brought to the Nebraska party, I think he's a little low on that list. Baker Mayfield was number 1 overall. And I disagree with that. Nothing against Baker, but I think Vince Young or there's a lot of guys I would take over, and I think Crouch was pretty special on the Nebraska teams, covering him when I was in college anyway. But I thought on Crouch and what where he lands on that list of the top 75, coming in at 45.
Well, those rankings are someone who probably didn't watch all those teams or all those quarterbacks, mm-hmm. So it's, you take it with a grain of salt. But all I know is the biggest victory ever at the University of Colorado against Nebraska, that game was never in hand for us because of Eric Crouch. And I don't care what the score was, and it looked like it was out of hand, but I can guarantee on that sideline and in those headsets, there was no way that game was over and that we knew we were going to win until we took the knee, and it was because of Eric Crouch. And so he just had the ability and to bring you back. It had the ability to turn a game around. So, I don't know what that says about everybody else, mm-hmm. but all I know is when you got through playing him, you usually had your butt beat. And if you did, you were lucky because of, whatever. So,
Coach, enjoy the weekend and hit them far and straight. Thanks for a few minutes.
All right, Chris. Great being with you.
So that was Gary Barnett's sit down with Schmitty, left for us before Schmitty went on vacation. Good stuff there from the coach, Gary Barnett, on a whole range of things, from code words on the sideline to let him know the head man was stopping by, as well as Nebraska-Colorado, the brunch in Boulder, kickoff time, and good stuff. As always, with Gary Barnett on a Thursday. We had Brandon Vogel back in hour 1. In addition to that, you can find both of those in podcast form. Hail Varsity's YouTube page as well for the full show. Next segment, got some NBA Finals to talk. My Nuggets playing. Also, a fun stat from Scott Docterman of The Athletic on SEC and their scheduling. Only 8 conference games. We'll get back into that. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency.
And now,
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
We roll through a Thursday. It's Hail Varsity Radio presented by Currency. Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark with you, filling in for Chris Schmidt today as we get you all geared up, not only for the start of the Husker football season, only 93 days away now, 92 days away now. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not actually keeping count. I know some of you out there are, so I apologize if I was wrong there. But also for the start of the NBA Finals. We'll get there in just 1 second. But first, an interesting stat that has been posted up online by Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. Does a great job covering Iowa athletics for The Athletic. And the stat from him, this is good stuff. Teams playing at least 10 Power 5 opponents in 2023. So, Power 5 schools, they have 10 other Power 5 schools on their schedule. In the Big Ten, 13 of the 14 schools are going to be playing 10 Power 5 schools next year. In the Big Ten, you have 11 of 14. The Pac-12, you have 10 of 12. In the ACC, 10 of the 15 are going to be playing 10 Power 5 opponents. And then in the SEC, two SEC schools out of 14 will be playing at least 10 Power 5 opponents in 2023. This obviously in relation to the news that broke about an hour ago that the SEC will remain at 8 conference games for 2024 and beyond. So no changes there as Texas and Oklahoma join the league. Connors, we laid out back in hour one, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. Even though that there's only 2 SEC teams playing at least 10 Power 5 teams.
Is it going to hurt them?
No, and it's still the SEC, and they still have amazing amounts of success. I mean, do you think, and I don't know who the 2 teams are in the SEC, I assume it's Bama and Georgia, or Bama's got to at least be one of them. I would be surprised if it's none of them. But even then, say Bama and Georgia do play 8 Power 5 teams, and they're all in the SEC. I mean, they're going to make it to either A, a high bowl game, or B, the playoff, probably the playoff. And there you can add on to your Power 5 opponents that are in the upper echelon of all the other ones. So, again, if the SEC didn't back it up in the postseason, I would have an issue with it. They don't. They don't have issues with that. They win national championships. It's the SEC. I think that's kind of the end of my argument for that.
They're not going to see any change in the SEC until there's ramifications for the fact that they're not playing as many Power 5 opponents as everybody else.
And the SEC is getting better.
There's no ramifications in terms of TV rights. There's no ramifications in terms of college football playoff, in terms of bowl opportunity. None of that changes for the SEC. So what's the incentive to add more Power 5 schools to your schedule unless you're just trying to take care of your fans and drive up ticket prices, I guess? There's no incentive to do so if you're an SEC school. So why are you going to change unless there becomes a point where there is going to be ramifications if you don't add? So,
well, and the SEC has been getting better, I think, too, just because, teams that would usually be around that 6-6 mark or whatever. I mean, take South Carolina, I think, is a prime example of that. The 8-5, barely lost to Notre Dame in a bowl game. Obviously, Tennessee's been pretty good, but they had a rough stretch there. Kentucky's, kind of going downhill, but the worst record in the SEC is 5-7, and you don't get that in a lot of other conferences as well. Mississippi State had a good year. Ole Miss kind of fell off towards the end, but still had a successful season. Obviously, LSU with a 10-win year, Alabama with a 10-win year, Georgia with a 10-win year, Tennessee with a 10-win year. So I think as a whole, and again, really the top dogs are what matter here, and they take care of business. So I don't really see a problem.
We go to the phone lines now where Mo has been patiently waiting. Mo, welcome into Hail Varsity Radio. What do you got for us today?
Yeah, just on that scheduling, I don't mind whether they play 8 or 9 or whatever, but I think the Big Ten should do what Alabama and all them Southern teams do, is schedule directional state before a big game. Just so they can give their players a rest, or anybody needs to get healthy,
Well, and Mo, that's kind of the discussion we're getting into here, is that the Big Ten, I don't want to say they've hamstrung themselves there. It's TV is the be-all, end-all in college football right now with the money you get there. And would you rather have games to warm up your season with your 3 non-conference, or would you rather have a game midway through November to get yourself a bye week of sorts? Would you rather start it off with...
I would rather go have at least one late you look at your schedule and range it where you want type deal.
And I get that, Mo, and thank you for the phone call today. You can give us a call, 402-489-1240 or 800-825-5865. The problem becomes the fact that, like Nebraska, look at their schedule this year. If they schedule one of those directional schools, say they get Louisiana Tech in November to be a bye-week warm-up game of sorts in November to give yourself a half week off, if you want to call it that. Do you want Michigan week 2 or week 3? Do you want Ohio State coming down week 3 after you've already played Minnesota?
Well, the problem is the problem that I have with the late in the season non-con games against a team that you're probably going to beat, especially when you're good. So say hypothetically Nebraska has a chance to go to the Big Ten championship game this year. They're supposed to be an 11 or 12 win team, whatever, and then you stick NIU in the second week of November. I feel like that just kind of ruins the momentum that you have because. Yeah, it's a half bye week, but at the same time, how valuable is that half bye week? Because you still got to go out there and play a game in the cold, assuming you're hosting, and even if you play a team like NIU, it's going to be cold no matter where you play. And you still take that risk, and it's not a full rest week because, any coaching staff in America, if you're playing a non-power school late in the year, they're not just going to say, all right, guys, we're going to take this week of practice off. No, especially if you have something to play for down the line. So I've never been a fan of late non-con games anyway because you're in the heart of the conference schedule and you go back to the fan perspective and the TV perspective. It's good for that too. But that's kind of my issue with the half bye week in air quotes per se because again, it's like, yeah, you're probably going to win and it's not like you're playing Michigan or whatever, but you still got to go out there and play a football game.
And from a conversation that I had whenever I was filling in on our morning show here locally, the Morning Hookup runs from 10 to 11 on our home station, 1240 KFOR. Dr. Dane Todd was in on a Friday, former Husker fullback now, doctor with Nebraska Orthopedic Center, and he was talking about a game they played under Callahan where they were playing, I think it was Troy. I could be wrong. Maybe it was Nicholls State. It was some program that is overlookable. And the following week, they played Oklahoma. In the entire week of practice, they didn't run a damn thing from. I think it was Nicholls State. Now that I think about it, they didn't run a damn thing in practice from Nicholls State. So all the team shows up in the first quarter, and they go, "This isn't the defense we prepared for all week." And Bill Callahan lets them know once it's like 14-0. Yeah, we didn't work on Nicholls State defense this week. We were playing Oklahoma's defense next week. That's what we were working on. So that's kind of the advantage. And I look at Alabama last year. They played Austin Peay on November 19th, 34-0 was the victory there. I doubt they did any game planning for Austin Peay, and they followed up with a win over Auburn the next week, a much more important game for Alabama. I bet they were working on Auburn schemes the entire week before, and you essentially get 2 weeks of practice before you go play Auburn in the Iron Bowl.
See, now this is interesting, too, because I'm going to maybe contradict myself here. So Alabama plays Texas early in the year. I don't want to go, as a fan of football, and go watch Alabama play Austin Peay on November 19th, right?
Yeah.
A week before the Iron Bowl. I mean, you want something that's going to have playoff potential implications or postseason implications or SEC implications on November 19th. You don't want to see Alabama and Austin Peay. Now, this goes back to the conversation of, okay, well, maybe the SEC should start playing more Power 5 opponents. And that's where the argument can get a little weird, and that's where I'll play devil's advocate on myself. You could go say, hey, maybe it does matter from the entertainment standpoint. I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter if Alabama's going to play Austin Peay on November 19th. They're probably still going to do what Alabama does the following week. You said they beat Auburn the following week in the Iron Bowl. So, but that's the other side of that argument that I could understand. You make a point there. Why are you playing, for lack of a better term, a scrub in the second to last week of the year when you could be playing a Power 5 opponent just because you scheduled a Power 5 opponent early in the year, too?
It's one of those conversations with no right answers.
I guess.
Because it hasn't hurt. It's what the SEC has done. It hasn't hurt them for years now. And until it hurts them, they're not going to change. Until the fans have some outcry, the college football playoff starts shunning SEC programs, nothing's going to change there. Unless TV rights comes in and says, you know what, we need a ninth conference game. That's what's going to change this for the SEC. as it stands right now, there is no reason for them to switch up what they've been doing, what's been working well for them.
Right.
So, Carl, let's get to some NBA thoughts here before we welcome in Danny Burke, the Pride of Chicago, will be joining us next segment to preview both the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Finals. The NBA is where we go now with the last 3 or so minutes of this segment. And Connor, we kind of laid it out off the top. The Nuggets playing in their first ever NBA Finals. You got to expect there's going to be a little bit of nervous energy in Ball Arena tonight as the fans get ready for that. As for the Heat, they've been there and done that, especially with Coach Erik Spoelstra. He has solidified himself one of the best coaches in the NBA. You could maybe make an argument for the top coach. It's probably between him and Greg Popovich in terms of the guys that have the resume that backs up the claim that they could be the best coach in the NBA. Erik Spoelstra just keeps on leading his teams on deep playoff runs, keeps on leading them to the playoffs, even when they're the 8 seed. It's been Jimmy Butler. It's been Kyle Lowry. It's been Max Strus.
Yes.
It's been just whoever for that Miami squad. They play a beautiful team brand of basketball, but as for the Nuggets, they do the same. They're reliant on Jokic in the middle, but what Jokic does is he feeds his teammates and creates beautiful ball movement. I think we're going to get a high-scoring series here. What say you in terms of the NBA Finals? Maybe not a prediction. I think we're going to lock in a steak and a beer bet a little bit later in the final segment of our show. But what's your outlook for what the NBA Finals is this year? It might not be the biggest draw for the casual NBA fan, but I think for those that really do appreciate the NBA, they're going to get themselves a solid NBA Finals.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty solid NBA Finals. I would agree with that. And, I mean, Jokic is going to do his thing. I mean, I've never watched, because one of my good friends is a Nuggets fan, so I've watched a lot of these playoff games with him, and I've never watched so much Denver Nuggets basketball at one time in my life, and they're so good at cutting to the basket whenever Jokic has the basketball, and that's a part of why he has so many assists per game. And obviously, Jokic is so good around the rim. He's getting rebounds. He's getting putbacks, whatever. He can also shoot the three.
It's arguably the first team in the NBA, at least in the modern era, that I remember since 2000, that's been built their offense around a center.
Yeah.
Not featuring a center. Their offense is their center with guys around him.
Well, and also it helps that you have guys emerging such as Michael Porter Jr., and I know there's been a lot of memes about him because he doesn't pass the ball once he gets it, but like he's been playing very well. Obviously, Jamal Murray is kind of back to his prime form right now. He's been playing out of his mind during the playoffs too, so that presents a lot of challenges for Miami. Now, obviously, Jimmy Butler has his team playing with the utmost amount of confidence with guys like Max Strus or a Gabe Vincent, or obviously Bam Adebayo is one of those big guys. Even a Caleb Martin, who stepped up huge in that Game 7. So I think the matchups here on paper, too, you can mix and match a lot of these off the role player guys between each team, and things could get really, really interesting.
Nuggets 9-point favorites tonight. They're favorites in the series as well. We'll get Danny Burke's betting prediction for the NBA Finals as well as the Stanley Cup Finals. That's coming your way after the break. It's Hail Varsity Radio presented by Currency.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark taking you through a Thursday edition of Hail Varsity Radio presented by Currency. A happy June to you and yours as the NBA Finals gets underway. We welcome in the Pride of Chicago, Danny Burke, joining us here, VSiN Sports Network. Danny, it's good to get caught up with you. Excitement's in the air. How are you doing on this fine June 1st?
Oh, I'm doing great, fellas. Thanks for having me on. And, yeah, looking forward to hopefully your Nuggets having quite the dominant series. As you know, I've come on the show numerous times during the postseason, and I will be sweating out Denver alongside you, buddy. I got plus 750 and 701 on Denver, so hopefully feeling pretty good, especially post-game one, my friend.
Danny, before we get to the NBA Finals, I first need to get your reaction on the news we've been hitting both yesterday and today. It's going to be brunch in Boulder, Nebraska and Colorado set for big noon kickoff. I just need to get your take on college football at 11 a.m. Central Time, 10 o'clock Mountain Time. And we can take a look at the betting perspective, I guess, here. But first, just your personal reaction to what that means. Do you like college football in the morning?
You know, I mean, earlier in the season, you'd rather have some of those games kind of get out of the way, right? And then the bigger ones, move them later if you need to. And I know it's a big game for both programs early on, but I'm certainly looking forward to it, as I know all of Husker Nation is as well. And as we know, there's a lot of hype around this Colorado program with Sanders moving along. And it's been kind of comical, to say the least, seeing all these guys go in and then transfer out. And what's also hilarious is seeing the amount of love in the betting market going to this Colorado team. And I mean that especially for their win total. I think it's at like 3.5, and I literally just saw somebody tweet who covers the numbers that like over 90% of the bets are on Colorado over 3.5 wins. Now, look, yes, they're going to be better. It's hard to be as bad or worse than they were last year, and the assumption is a guy like Deion, who's a program changer, is going to fix that. Will it be fixed in year one? Realistically, probably not. I feel like everybody's going to be severely disappointed once they realize that, like most coaches and most programs, it takes more than a year to do a complete 180, especially at a relatively smaller football program like Colorado. So this is going to be, of course, a huge statement game for both universities, but you still got to hope Nebraska has the advantage here. I mean, yeah, you got Matt Rule, a new coach in the mix, but this was a Huskers team that, despite them being incredibly frustrating, we all know that, you have a lot of pieces there. You were still building in the right direction to where Colorado was just completely at the bottom. The aspirations for Nebraska were a ton higher, and you still have some of those pieces. You've added some strong ones through the transfer portal yourself. I'm not so worried about this being in a road spot and in a bigger spot early on for Colorado. Nebraska should still have the advantage. And long story short, what I'm getting to with Colorado, again, is don't fall too in love with this team, because just like everybody else, there's still going to be infinite hurdles they are going to have to go over.
Danny, to the NBA Finals we go. Game 1 is tonight, 7:30 Central Time, the tip between the Nuggets and the Heat. That's slated for ABC. This series price has moved towards the Nuggets in recent days, and it's a 9-point line for Game 1 tonight. Talk about the NBA Finals. You can talk about Game 1. You can talk about the series, whatever you like. Let's get into it. Let's preview the Nuggets and the Heat in the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I mean, look, this Heat team has been a fascinating story, and especially as a Bulls fan, me being, I mean, watching Jimmy Butler do his thing is, yeah, bittersweet, because obviously the front office, being as idiotic as they are, let him go, and now you're seeing Jimmy have continuous success. But, you know, Jimmy shares his admiration for Chicago, much like the fans do toward him. So them in the adversity they dealt with overcoming Boston, again, tremendous. But it feels like that, in a sense, was their Super Bowl, right? That was kind of their peak in terms of what they could accomplish. Going against the Denver Nuggets, not having home court advantage, as we know, is really going to be too tall of a task for them to overcome. I mean, the Nuggets are just, they're as deep as Boston. Well, maybe not as deep on paper, but with the depth that they have, they can actually get quality offense from them, whereas Boston, as we know, or as we thought, they underperformed based on the expectations that were set. Denver's been such a disciplined, organized, well-oiled machine all season long, hence why they were the 1 seed, hence why they are in the championship right now. And despite all of those accolades throughout the year, just because they slacked a little bit toward the end, people wrote them off, people forgot about them, everybody became infatuated with the chance of the Warriors being good again, the Lakers having a chance with Anthony Davis getting healthier, but everybody kept forgetting about Denver. That's why I was able to get still a relatively solid price on Nuggets when it was clear they were going to be the most well-balanced team out of the Western Conference. Miami is far outmatched here. I mean, Bam Adebayo has been a very big disappointment. He has his moments, but the fact that Robert Williams was getting anything he really wanted, and we know he's not an offensive guy, that is beyond concerning when you're going up against who should be the back-to-back-to-back MVP in Nikola Jokic. And we know how dynamic Jokic can be, not only with his scoring, but with his passing and facilitating. So that is going to be obvious from the start. If you get role players like Bruce Brown stepping up, I mean, you know, this is really going to be a long game and series for Miami. We can expect MPJ to still hit perimeter shots. Jamal Murray, the way he was playing at the end of the last series, if that translates over, again, it's just going to be so tough. They're so outmatched here. It's kind of like you used all the gas in your tank, and you got to where you wanted to, farther than you thought, but now you're actually at the most difficult part with a team that came prepared. So, Elijah, I feel like Denver probably wins this series in 5 games. On a game-to-game basis, it's trickier, right? I'm not eager to lay about 9 points with Denver, especially in game ones, which in any kind of postseason are always typically a little bit wonkier. So I've got nothing in terms of the individual game one. Again, I'm just sweating out those futures bets, and I'm not going to hedge. And if I really wanted to, say Miami played a really good game but barely lost, Well, if Denver wins game one, I can get an even better price then for the series going forward if the Nuggets have a 1-0 advantage on a better adjusted series price to hedge if I felt worried or if some injury occurred or something like that. So I'm feeling great about your Nuggets. If I had to lean, I'd maybe do something with Denver in the first half so you get a shorter spread, and assuming they're more well-rested, they're prepared, whereas, again, Miami just climbed their mountaintop, relatively speaking. It'll probably be a little sluggish for this Miami team from the get-go.
Danny Burke is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. Danny, about 30 seconds here, but where can I find the Jokic over-under for points, and where can I also find the over button for that?
Hey, anywhere you get, I know you guys got to venture out a little bit to Iowa, but yeah, you got to make your way out there and look to capitalize. But I know we're running out of time. For anybody who does have that available, a great trick to do is to live bet these props if you can, because these algorithms don't adjust for the inevitable rest these guys are going to get. So then the numbers come down. You know they're going to get back in and be fine, and then you can jump in on the over. That's the way to attack a guy like Jokic, who's a stat-padded machine.
Yeah, the line tonight set for Jokic, 27.5. Danny, quickly, 15 seconds here. Vegas Golden Knights or Florida Panthers? Vegas thinks that this series is going to be a lot closer. Who are you taking?
I've been down in Vegas all postseason, but I got to go with my secondary team here. I went with the Golden Knights minus 125 to win the series, and then minus 1.5 on the series spread at plus 175. Go Knights, go, baby.
There he is, Danny Burke, joining us here on on Hail Varsity Radio. VSiN Sports Network is where you check him out. Follow him on Twitter at DannyBurke5. Danny, appreciate your time here on a Thursday afternoon. Enjoy the game tonight, and may all your bets cash.
Appreciate it, guys. Take care and enjoy it yourselves.
There is Danny Burke joining us. We'll wrap up a Thursday edition of Hail Varsity Radio after the break, as Connor and I are going to lock in our stake in a beer bet for this Nuggets series, the team, and in how many games. We'll get there after the break on Hail Varsity Radio.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Wrapping up a Thursday edition, June 1st, Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency for all your equipment financing needs. Go Currency, Elijah Herbel and Connor Clark taking you through the show today. If you missed anything from the show, we had Brandon Vogel back in hour one. Brandon always joins us on Thursday, kind enough to do that. He was awesome today. You can check that out in podcast form. It'll be posted shortly following the conclusion of the show. And then leading off hour two, we had longtime coach Colorado and Northwestern Hall of Famer at both, Gary Barnett, joined to talk brunch in Boulder and a whole lot more. That's also going to be available in podcast form. And then we just heard from Danny Burke, VSiN Sports Network, Burke's Best Bets, previewing the NBA Finals mostly. Also got into the NHL Stanley Cup Finals as well. So you can check out all of that in podcast form, segmentized, or the full show, however you like it. And then you can also check out the full video version posted up in full, commercial breaks cut out on the Hail Varsity YouTube page. It's a great place to check that out. Live stream can also be caught every single day. The Hail Varsity Twitter feed, that is at HVarsity Radio, the Hail Varsity YouTube page, KFOR's Twitter and Facebook as well, is where you can check out the live stream every single day if you want to check us out live. If you like to cut out the commercial breaks, Hail Varsity YouTube page is the place to go. Connor, before we get out of here, I do think it's time for a stake and a beer bet.
Sounds like. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Well, do you even want to touch the 9-point line tonight? That's the question. We could do two separate stake and a beer bets. One for the series as a whole, which team do you got and in how many games, and then we could also do the line tonight, 9 points. I think that could be interesting if that's how you want to start it off.
Yeah, we could do that. I'm in for that.
Okay, I'll let you pick. First, you pick which one you would like to take off the board first. Do you want to go the series price or the game price tonight? And then you make your selection there. I'll obviously have to go the other way, and then I'll get to make my selection on the other one.
I'll take the series one first.
Okay.
And I think the Nuggets will win, but I don't know. I got a weird feeling it's going to go to 6. So I'm going to go Nuggets in 6. I think Miami plays well enough at home to maybe get a couple. And just I've been doubting Miami all postseason, and I've been wrong about them all postseason. Maybe I'm putting my support behind them at the wrong time, but I'm gonna go Miami, or not Miami, sorry, Nuggets in 6. But Miami is able to pick off a couple.
Okay, I like that. I'm gonna go Nuggets in 5.
Yeah,
I picked Nuggets over the Lakers in 5, and I should have picked them in 4. My head is telling me to pick Nuggets in 6, like you. it's no fun if I pick the same thing as you. My heart says Nuggets in 5.
I mean, I could see that in 5, though, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, realistically, it's probably going to go 7 just because of what the Heat. I mean, everyone doubts them. They have the best coach in the
7.
NBA. They have Jimmy Butler. That'd be fantastic.
I don't know.
That'd kill my nerves, but I don't know. Something tells me that might be the future. I'll go Nuggets in 5, though.
Okay.
I'll take my heart there, and I'll go that. As for tonight, give me the Nuggets to cover a 9-point line. The Heat have come off a couple of grueling series, 7 games. You only get 2 days off, and now you get the stress of the NBA Finals. Let's add to that. You're going to be playing at altitude. I think this Heat team probably hangs tough in the first half. I think they start to lose it in the second half, and I think Eric Spoelstra probably pulls the starters, gets some extra rest in that fourth quarter. The Nuggets pull away late, and I got the Nuggets to cover a 9-point line.
Yeah, I wish I could agree with you there. I mean, I'm going to go the other way just, again, because it's not fun if we both do the same thing. So Miami covers 9 points. But, yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you. Short rest, I mean, that's going to be tough, especially going straight from Boston to Denver. I mean, again, this Miami team has been crazy all postseason, but at some point you got to come down to earth.
That'll do it for us here today on a Thursday edition of Hail Varsity. Tomorrow, special guest Brady Oltman's joining me in studio. He's going to co-host the Friday edition. You can check that out 4 to 6 on your Friday. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency.